Hey kids, howdy and welcome once again to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. And it's July 1st. It sounds like it's a silly trope, Zoe, to talk about how time seems to be going faster.
Well, every month it's just like,
But oh my God, so here we are in July. It's an interesting month in July. It's not particularly more challenging than the last few months. In some ways, it's a little less because the spring was so dicey. But there's a couple of things that happened in July collectively that will be interesting, especially if you turn on the news. We got all the personal planets changing signs. Mercury's going to start his retrograde shadow later in the month. So it's a month. But we start with a question. Let's do as we always do. Nuria has written this question. Dear Michael, I am a listener of your weekly podcast, and I can't express enough gratitude for the joy and gift you share with us. I live in Oz, and so look forward to hearing your wisdom on a Monday evening when your podcast comes out. Love that. I have a question, if I may, with Jupiter going into Gemini. There's a lot of talk of how it will be impacting the sign or the personal planet, but never the South Node or the North Node. I would love if you could elaborate on this as to get some clarification. Warmly, Nuria. Absolutely. Let's talk about this. I think, Nuria, you might be a little disappointed in my answer, because it's not quite as exciting and juicy as one might fantasize. But let me explain why. So, the nodes of the moon in a natal chart describe a person's past and their future, where the South Node is the karmic entry into this life. If you're on the woo-woo spectrum and you like to think about past lives, the South Node would describe energies that you might have brought in with you from a past life. Things you're naturally good at and gifted with will be part of your South Node experience. I'm a singer. I sing differently in every moon sign. And when the moon is in Capricorn, which is my South Node, I sing the best. My intonation is the sharpest.
wow.
Yeah, right? You know, it's like interesting as a musician. Like when I was a teenager studying voice, I used to complain to my girlfriend. It's like every week it feels different. Some weeks it feels great to sing and some weeks it feels horrible. And one day she was in the kitchen listening to my lesson, rating for hers, and she said, "Oh, you're right." So that's just an example of I sing the best in the South Node because the South Node represents the karmic past, talents and gifts you brought in with you, and your sort of entrance to the life that you're living. And then the North Node, the opposite point, is your dharma, life purpose, where you're going, what you came to bring or learn or give to the world, what you sort of start trekking with in the latter part of your life. You know, your first 40 years are all about your South Node, and the second 40 years are all about your North Node. But here's the thing. The nodes are a collective point because up in the cosmos, they're generated through eclipses, or rather they generate the eclipses because they're associated with a collective transformative cosmic event called eclipses. When they land in our chart, even though they represent our individual past and future, because they're a collective point, we experience transits to our nodes as mostly reflecting interactions with other people. So like if I'm doing my daily Astro Alert subscription, that the detailed one that people pay for, or what turns into my Red Robe Astrology videos, and there's a general transit out there where a planet is touching the nodes, I will comment on how gatherings are going to go. Like if the geometry is pleasant, I'll be like gatherings in flow and yumminess. But if it's like squaring the nodes, I'll be like, your gatherings are out of obligation or bumpy or challenging. So it's the same thing in a personal chart. That a transit from any planet to the nodes of the moon are impacting a person's handling of their past in a karmic way and dramatically handling their future in a powerful way, North Node. But when it's Jupiter, it's more mood than substance. Jupiter is not a transformational planet. It's a social planet that describes moments in our outside life that are expansive or joyful or fast-moving or feel good. Saturn, the other social planet, does transform us because he's carrying wisdom, responsibility, and the karmic lesson. So when Saturn transits our chart, we're learning something. When Jupiter transits our chart, we're feeling good. When transits from Saturn are over, we're different. And when transits from Jupiter are over, we might not be. Okay. So if that's the case, if transits to the nodes are more about how you connect with others, one could argue that if you have your south node, your past, in Gemini, where Jupiter is, and Jupiter is going to transit your south node 3 times over the next 10 months. That means your interactions with people and groups and associations where you have to gather are more likely to be bumpy, difficult, or some way challenging. Still Jupiter, which means it can't be like breakdowns or destructiveness. But it could be about gathering with groups that's uncomfortable or connecting with people where it's just bumpier than flowing. And conversely, if your north node is in Gemini, that means that your interactions with people and groups and the outside world are going to be more positive and forward-reaching, helping you expand your life. Just try to give an example. If Jupiter were crossing your south node, you might feel uncomfortable in a group that supported you for years, and now it's starting to feel like your expansion might need you to exit that group because the south node is about the past. Whereas the Jupiter transiting your north node in Gemini might be the year you join a spiritual center and devote to a whole new way of operating. Or you might take a class that expands your sense of education, therefore your future, right? But they're not transformative in that they don't leave you radically changed when it's Jupiter hitting your nodes. But if it's the south node, think bumpy. If it's the north node, think smooth. And it's all going to play out as a function of how you're interacting with the communities that you're creating. So Saturn went retrograde in Pisces yesterday, and Neptune is going retrograde in Pisces tomorrow. So if you've been following me for a while, you know that I have an agenda when it comes to how I present the information that social and outer planets are going retrograde or direct. So let me start by this. There is a difference between any planet moving retrograde or direct. So if I then contradict that or seem to contradict that in a few minutes, because I am, I want to be clear, I'm not contradicting the notion that there is a significant difference between a planet's consciousness and our experience of it when it's moving retrograde versus direct. Part of why I get bothered by the way pop astrology talks about outer planet retrogrades, Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto, is that the sensation of the difference between any of the outer planets being direct or retrograde is something that, in my 30-year experience of being an astrologer and using my own body's sensation to create anecdotal data about what it is to have an outer planet retrograde or direct, I just don't have any information in 30 years of looking at this that says it's appreciably different. And I've seen, and I've said this out loud many times, I have seen memes in pop astrology contradicting each other. And I've shared this story before, and God damn, I wish I had collected these or screenshotted them, because I literally in 1 week, when Neptune was turning around, saw one astrologer say, everything's going to get clearer when Neptune goes within, and everything's going to get cloudier and more confusing when Neptune turns within.
The same person, or you're
So
saying
here's what I have to
people same week.
Yeah, different astrologers are saying, here's what's happening, kids, and here's what to expect, with completely contradictory messages.
Yeah.
And the reasons that's possible, because it doesn't make a fucking bit of difference. You don't feel it. And I'll go toe-to-toe with any astrologer who says differently and promise that they're talking about the information as they learned it, and I'm talking about 30 years of watching astrology move through my body and making declarations about what energy feels and works like. I believe in my ability to do that, and if, you do, I might be the astrologer for you, and if you don't, bye-bye. There's thousands of us out there. Find somebody who's talking about this differently. Now, Saturn and Jupiter are the social planets. They're not the outer planets. The outer planets represent our higher self, where the distinction between retrograde and direct is not something that we're going to feel. It's happening at the level of psyche and soul and unconscious and higher self and fourth dimensional self. We do not feel that. Saturn turning around, I would say we do feel that, because it's a social planet. Saturn and Jupiter reflect experiences that we have in our bodies out in the world. I like to say Saturn and Jupiter are everything from your front door out. So I'm going to say the same thing, though. Yes, you're going to feel this more distinctly in a social planet than an outer planet, where I say you can't feel it at all. But I've never felt the difference. Never, ever, ever have I been like, oh my God, everything feels so different because Saturn changed direction. Never, not once. Now, I'll tell you this. Saturn's in Pisces, going retrograde at 19. My Chiron is at 13 degrees of Pisces. And when Saturn hit my Chiron this past March, it was fucking brutal. So that means that Saturn turning around tells me, the native who knows astrology, that transit is coming back again. So I get some value at this moment of Saturn turning around, of going, okay, I'm headed back into territory where my inner world might reflect something similar to March, when Saturn hit my Chiron for the first time. But if you don't know your chart like I'm talking about I do, then again, I just don't see how Saturn turning around is going to make a difference. There's an astrologer that I respect on TikTok, and I saw her post this morning talking about Saturn turning around, and it's like I didn't object to any of the language she used. I wouldn't have said, you're wrong. I just would have said, I don't think anybody's going to feel that. I'll say having two major planets stationing and turning around at the same time, Saturn yesterday, Neptune tomorrow, in the sign of Pisces, I guess I could make an argument that those two events of two major planets not moving and appearing to turn around within 2 days of each other will color what last week, this weekend, and the week ahead will feel like, but not in a way that I, as an astrologer, can say in the way that I like to say, here's what to expect during this station. I can't come up with language like that, because it doesn't come up out of my body. So, lecture over. And I know that not everybody's going to vibe with this. I know a lot of classical astrologers will just cast me off as a nouveau astrologer that shouldn't be taken as seriously, because I don't rely on the ancient rules as much as, others. But this is my experience and this is how I teach. And take it or leave it. Have at it. All of the personal planets are going to change signs this month. That's not that unusual. None of them spent terribly long in any sign, so it's not unusual to have them all changing signs in a month. But it does spell a month where there's going to be shifting energies, and Mercury moving into Leo tomorrow is interesting because Mercury will zip through Leo in his typical 2.5-week sort of stay in any sign, but then he'll move into Virgo, slow down, turn around next month, and do a backward journey starting on like August 5th. So we're not anywhere near the shadow period yet, kids. Just hang tight. In a couple of weeks, I'll be like, here we are. Start paying attention because the retrograde started. But know that when Mercury moves into Leo, that we are going to be moving through the next 2 months or so in a communicative process where our voices will dive into the most creative sense of power and leadership that we can each muster. 2.5 weeks of Mercury in Leo. Sun ruled, it's the center of us, and it's where we first understood creative personal expression and that sense of who's in charge, who's leading the way, and it's always going to be the sun, Leo. But then Mercury will move into Virgo, turn around, and retrograde, traveling over both Virgo and Leo. I'll talk more about this when we get there, but understand what's going to be happening over the next couple of months is as we step into more bravura in the voice starting tomorrow, we might need to heal a thing or two or learn a thing or two, which is great for Mercury moving into Virgo, the healing, integration, and process sign. So again, I'm getting way ahead of myself here because this doesn't happen until the middle of July, and then the retrograde doesn't happen until the 5th of August. But understand, communication changes starting tomorrow. And if you're in a place where you're looking to expand something you've been working on or creating, the next 2.5 weeks will have all of us ready to sort of toot our own horns a little bit louder because Mercury in Leo provides us the confidence to do so. Our next lunar cycle starts this week. On Friday, we move through a new moon in Cancer. It's Friday the 5th, about 4 p.m. Pacific time, 14 degrees of Cancer. And a Cancer new moon is where we're setting intentions to create a richer and deeper experience of home, family, protection, self-care, and all of the preparation that's needed to sort of go out in the world and be powerful and expansive. Right? If you remember, we had a full moon in Capricorn 2 weeks ago, and it was the first of 2. Which means this is the lunar cycle that includes the next full moon in Capricorn in 2 weeks at the mastery degree, the 30th degree of Capricorn. So that means that this new moon in Cancer is being sandwiched in between 2 powerful lunar cycles where Saturn, the teacher, is ruling the full moons. Capricorn ruled by Saturn. So if we're in the Cancer mansion where we're looking at home and self-care and preparation and rest and all of the Cancerian consciousness, then the full moon in Capricorn allows us to turn within and see what adjustments need to be made in order for us to be more powerfully out there climbing the mountain of our desires. So I'll say way more about that in 2 weeks as well, because a second full moon in the same sign is a juicy astrological opportunity to double down on what's possible to be released. So if that's the case, if we have a release mechanism behind us driven by Saturn the teacher and another one in 2 weeks in the same sign by Saturn the teacher, then this new moon in Cancer sort of is a beautiful opportunity to really dig in and say, what do I need to create for myself that maybe has been really difficult to foster or manage that allows me to put my own care first? This is truly the put your frickin' oxygen mask on first. I don't care how vulnerable or scary that seems to be to let your kid not breathe for a minute. So, the fact that Venus is still close enough to the sun and the moon in this new moon to be what we would call conjunct, then this new moon in Cancer has Venus's love in the self-love sign. Talk about an opportunity to up your game of preparing and caring for yourself so that you could be more powerful in the outside world. In a world and in a Western culture that's driven by productivity as the coin of the realm and accomplishment as the only thing that seems to satisfy, this is where we say, all right, let's put that to bed for a second. Let's just take off from our perspective, remove from our perspective what we want to accomplish for a minute and just turn within and ask your body and your belly, what do you need? What rest, what safety, what shift in home and hearth do you need? And set powerful intentions to create that, knowing we have another second Capricorn full moon to help us release stuff that allows us to be more powerful. Now remember, Saturn and Neptune have just turned around and gone retrograde. And I just got done telling you that it makes no difference, except I will say that there is something deeper and more accessible to the inner landscape to have a new moon that has Venus conjunct in the water sign of Cancer and having that juicy new moon energy in a trine with Saturn and Neptune, the teacher and our spiritual connection. And because they just turned around in the 2 days before, 2 to 5 days before the new moon, now that counts. Now I can say an incredibly important new moon in the sign where we put our care front and center gets inserted to the deepest parts of us because Pisces represents our deep unconscious. We set intentions with our conscious awareness, but we plant them in the unconscious spaces where the traction in our unconscious for what we desire can grab those new moon intentions like little seeds and start feeding them. The deeper you go into the fertile soil, the richer the crop. I don't know if that's exact in farming, but it's poetic.
Sounds good enough for me.
Right. So I'm saying this is an important new moon for care of self so that you can be more powerful. And the fact that it's in easy, harmonious geometry with the teacher and the great spirit in the sign of the unconscious, it's like any intentions you set with your conscious mind, which we do with Mercury, the planet of thought, these intentions go all the way deep, 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 deep into the richest, most fertile part of your unconscious mind. Know that. Meanwhile, Mercury, who's just moved into Leo, ready to sort of help us sort of trumpet our desires, is opposing Pluto pretty tightly in this new moon. So this is sort of a setup for the mind's sort of challenges with too much in the Leonian mansion, too much self-focus, too much I count, you don't, too much I'm the leader of all, the sun is shining brightly on me and therefore not on you. I'm probably telling tales on myself being Leo Sun and Leo Venus. I know a little bit about feeling like the more important person in the room. But having Leo in an opposition with Pluto during the new moon does two things for us. One is it allows our minds to be connected to the depths and the gravitas and the power and authority of Pluto as we go into the below and set powerful intentions from a place of a deep unconscious need to care for self more, right? So Pisces may invent the unconscious, but Pluto has the underworld, which is archetypally sort of a room in the unconscious where transformation and change happens. So Mercury opposing Pluto in a new moon allows us to set intentions that transform how we think, perceive, and use our voice to create what we want. There's a potential bumpiness to the whole lunar cycle because the new moon is holding a fairly tight T-square with the nodes of the moon. So remember, we just got done talking about any cosmic event that touches into the nodes is reflecting how we connect with others and groups and things outside of ourselves. So a new moon creates an energy that we're going to feel for 4 weeks as like an imprinting, that anything that's happening at the moment of the new moon, those sensations will be part of the whole 4 weeks of the lunar cycle. So a new moon that sends us in new directions, because that's what we're, doing in a new moon. We're trying to create something new, an alpha omega movement moment. Cancer's a cardinal sign, which is the energy of startup. So the new moon itself has a lot of thrust to start something new that is like initiatory. But because it squares the south node and squares the north, it does mean that our attempts to move away from the past might be bumpy or be conflict-oriented. And what we're building to move forward, same thing. New moon, square the north node. So just understand that we're building stuff in the lunar cycle ahead that starts on Friday. So I'm going to talk about something today at the end of this episode that I'll probably repeat at the top of next week's episode. There's 2 collective transits that hit, one this week and one next week. Both of them are transits hitting the north node. This whole podcast is about the nodes. I'm hoping that it's been instructive. So, at the top of the podcast, I said that there's some collective bumps that happen in July. So what do I mean by that? I would say turn on the news in the 2nd and 3rd week in July. You're probably going to see a lot of stuff that's bumpier than usual because, again, the nodes of the moon, when they are transited, reflect moments of collective expression. So the thing that's happening next week is Jupiter is forming a sextile with the north node of the moon. That's an energy of positive forward movement, of connections with others that really help us foster what we desire to create next. In a vacuum, that would be a lovely energy. The problem is, 5 days before that, this Friday, with the new moon, Uranus, the planet of anything can happen and probably will, is going to semi-square the north node, 45-degree angle. So if 90 degrees is the conflict obstacle energy of a square, and a 90-degree square with Uranus will mean like things like, your house fell into a sinkhole, the pivot was faster than you could keep up with. So a semi-square is half that. So this is a transit of unexpected bumps in the road. Uranus is significantly slower than Jupiter. We're talking about an 84-year orbit compared to a 12-year orbit. The slower the planet, the more weight we give it. So what that means is in the middle of this week and the middle of the next week, we have 2 transits that will express themselves as bumpy experiences in the collective. Both, as I suggested, turn on the news, you will see some amplification, but also in our personal experiences, you can expect these couple of weeks to have bumpier interactions with groups and group associations, with an emphasis on this week being the week of pivot or the unexpected change or things that happen that you have to deal with very suddenly. Next week is a little different because that energy will be behind us a few days and Jupiter only brings positive things, though he can make things over the top. That's why we'll talk about it at the beginning of next week's pod, as well as now at the end of this week's podcast. But do understand that this week begins a kind of bumpiness that you will see play out both in the collective and in some of our individual experiences of connecting with others. Have at it.
Did you know that Michael has a daily astro alert? If you enjoy hearing the weekly astrology, you might like knowing more about each day. When you subscribe for the daily astro alerts, you'll get an in-depth explanation of the day's astrology sent right to your email. Subscriptions are only $10 a month, or you can purchase the yearly subscription at the reduced price of $100. To subscribe, head over to michaellennox.com. All right, it's dream segment time. Every week, Dr. Michael will interpret dreams that are sent in via email or take a live caller. If you would like your dream interpreted on the podcast, you can go ahead and email us at dreams@michaellennox.com. Hopefully your dream will make it onto the show. Today we have a dreamer calling in from Ontario. Hey Charity, what you dreaming?
Hey there, thanks for having me. This is a 3-part dream, and they are all relevant to one another. So, my first dream, my brother-in-law dropped his son off to be watched by my husband and I while he was away. When he returns, he is very angry that I was the person who had fed his son strawberries and healthy food when he was hungry. He wanted my husband to do it, but he was in a back room working on something. It was such a big deal to him that I did it. He pulled my husband back into the back room and made him pick between having a relationship with his old family or with me. My brother-in-law comes to me after crying, saying that my husband chose me. He was very sad and very angry, and the dream ends. Then it suddenly goes into the second dream, and I'm very aware of the dream I just came out of, and it all is extremely relevant. So I'm walking with my kids in an Arizona desert, and I suddenly feel like I need to watch for snakes. And just then, one jumps out and tries to attack me. I knew it wasn't a poisonous one because the snake felt really, really familiar. As it tried to attack, I take a sword and cut its head off. My kids and I are looking at this dead snake on the ground. When they lose their interest and are no longer looking, I remember that snakes' heads can reattach, so I turn around and see that the snake is back to life. It bites me in the dream because I feel it, but I don't visually see the snake bite me or have awareness of an injury. I realize now that it is my job to teach my kids to protect themselves from snakes, and this dream ends. Then we go into dream 3. I remember the first dream, I remember the second dream, and this is the third dream. We are at the big bush property that we regularly visit, which is from my husband's parents. And I'm holding on to the wisdom from the last dream. I realize that there could potentially be rattlesnakes here, and I fear for my kids' safety. We are out walking when I hear the rattle, and a snake jumps out from under some sticks. It's going crazy, making big circles on the ground, and finally jumps up to attack me. It bites me deeply on my index finger and thumb. Just then, I realize I don't know if 911 is going to save me because they might not be prepared for calls about rattlesnakes here. And then the dream ends.
Fabulous, fabulous series of dreams, and all about change and transformation on some level because of snakes. So now, do I understand that you have a sense of what this dream is speaking for?
Yeah. So
for
the
yourself?
relationship between me and my spouse's family is going through a rebirth, for sure. And just through our Yeah, just our own experience.
Okay.
They're not as accepting of his choices of having us as a family there together. Yeah.
Okay, great. That actually gives me a sense of it because it's like dream number one is like the pedestrian state of affairs. Dream number two is like how it's always been handled in the past. And dream number three is like what needs to take place is an actual change and transformation. So here's how I see that. So in the first dream, it's all about the conflict and it identifies you as the problem, right? So you're the problem because you're being identified as problematic, but again, it's your dream, right? So it's not your brother-in-law's dream, about how much he just respects you. It's your dream about receiving the criticisms around you about good choices that you believe in.
Ooh.
Right? Sweet choices.
Yeah, that
right?
really resonates for sure.
Right? And so that's the setup. So we get the lay of the land in dream number one. I have beliefs. There's a part of my psyche. That's you. The I in this is Jerry, right? I have beliefs. Life should be sweet. We should feed people well. We should care for everything in a lovely, yummy way. And there's something in my environment that is antithetical to that in a really problematic way. And now, of course, we know from your waking life that it's likely about waking life challenges between families that are joined in marriage. So then we get into the second dream. It's more personal because it's you walking with your kids, right? We're now not in a conflict situation. We're in charity psyche. And now you're in the Arizona desert. Is that a random place for you to be in a dream landscape, living up there in green, wet Ontario,
no,
Canada?
I have a good friend that lives in Arizona for half of the year.
Got it. So there is some personal association with Arizona from your waking life, but it is interesting that you're in a desert in dream two, right? Because that has meaning. Like you've got other friends with other homes. You could have dreamt of Hawaii or, Nova Scotia right? But it was the desert. So we're in some exploration of something about life and psyche that feels empty or dying or deserty or lacking of life. You can't grow a strawberry in a desert.
Dry and uncomfortable are the words that come to mind.
Right. Dry and uncomfortable. Okay. So what's really interesting is the non-poisonous snake feels very familiar. That tells me it's about attempts for change and transformation that have not worked. You try to cut the head off with the snake. That's like saying, I'm going to cut the head off of this conflict. I'm going to get behind it somehow and handle it, except that it keeps reattaching. And then it's like the message that you've got to teach your kids to be prepared for this. Now, that tells us that dream two really is about your conflicts with feeling disregarded or criticized or whatever else the dreams might be reflecting. The second dream is telling me that the old way that feels very familiar doesn't work. It doesn't work in the dream either,
100%.
right? You're like, I'll fix this. We cut the head off the snake. That's to like say, if there's a conflict, I'm going to somehow cut it off, or I'm going to maybe hold my tongue. That was a thought I had of cutting off the head of the snake is like saying, I have change and transformation within me, but if I don't speak it directly and try to get the change to happen in another way, it ain't going to work.
Absolutely.
So now you're in this other property that you visit sometimes, and so it's a new dream. Anything interesting about that? You said, I heard big bush property, but I don't think I know what that means or if I even heard you correctly.
The property belongs to my mother and father-in-law, and so my husband and I have been together for almost a decade, and we've spent many, many weekends there, before kids, after kids. But we did spend a period away.
Okay, so we could call it a sacred place of intimacy, connection, restoration, and rest. Okay, so there we go. Then dream one, conflict. Dream two, paucity of charity, considering the old ways. And then when you return to your heart center, I'm going to call Big Bush property your heart center. Right, so when you return to your heart center, then, pardon?
I said it definitely was. That was always my place to go and return to alignment, for sure.
Got it. So when you return to your own heart, you recognize that the change that's happening is bigger, it's greater, and it needs to happen. The rattlesnake, right? The dream 2 snakes were worthless. They weren't poisonous, they were small, they were familiar, and they kept reattaching. But dream 3 says, oh no, we mean business with change and transformation. And you hear the rattle before it jumps out. That's actually a standard in rattlesnake sort of behavior. But it also tells us that you're aware of the conflict and aware that it has to be handled in a big way. And then it jumps out and it grabs you deeply on the, what'd you say, finger and thumb?
Yeah.
That's interesting. The association I make with that, when I first heard you said deeply, I write notes while I'm watching because I'm 60 and I can't remember things. So I wrote bites with all capital letters because that seemed important. The bite in the dream tells me the change and transformation is occurring. Not has to occur, not might occur. It is occurring, Charity. The snake bit you. Done.
Oh, yeah.
Venom is now in you, right? So then we have to look at the finger and thumb consciousness. So when I was writing the notes as you were talking, I wrote deeply, bites me deeply index finger. And then I thought, oh, it's about pointing or blaming or point. But no, then you say thumb. So I had to change my view. It's not just a finger pointing, it's the thumb and finger. What do you do with the thumb and finger? You put
things up, right?
Oh, that's absolutely right. It's the height of your dexterity and your capacity. That's a brilliant association, Charity, that says I can, by transforming my choice mechanism, my dexterity, my ability to pick something up and choose, absolutely. You're going to be able to pick your battles. That might be a cutism pun in the dream. But this is a battle you need to fight. The other thing, that association that I had with the thumb and the finger is if you put them together in a mudra, we have the symbol of okay.
Ooh, I love that.
So it's like you let the rattlesnake bite you when you're living in your heart center, and it says you've got to pick and choose better and come to a place of okayness, which you will be able to do if you're willing to surrender to the uncomfortableness of bringing in the big snake of change to help further whatever transformational thing you alluded to was actually happening between you, your husband, and his family.
Yeah, that's delicious. And it resonates super deep.
Oh, I'm so
I guess
glad,
one thing to take it home, which I know you'll love, is we were there on the weekend and found out that his parents had found a dead snake about 2 days before we arrived.
Okay, so
like,
you just can't make this shit up. It's a beautiful synchronicity where the veil lifts and everybody's experiencing the dream, including
death,
the family in waking life. So beautiful, and thank you so much for this rich and juicy dream, Charity.
Thank you so much for interpreting it.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellennox.com for information on astrology readings, the daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.